All right, so yeah, I had mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit about the health curriculum, particularly the human development and growth of the body sections. I just want to preface this by saying that I recognize this is a polarizing topic in our community and even among our board. And so I think this is our first big test of a board to have a conversation about something where we might stand on different sides of the fence on and have a civil conversation to see if we can come to some agreement on something. I think what I'd like to do for the next 45 to 50 minutes is talk to you all about 5 to 7 minutes, but that doesn't sound as bad when you initially.
I just want to get out of the.
I hope that's not true.
That's a joke. That's a joke. Okay, so as Kim was mentioning earlier, the state law guides us on what we teach related to sex education. Ohio Revised Code section 3313.6011 specifically. And when I read this revised code, it seems very outdated, in some ways draconian, in ways that are meant to shame students out of having sex at the expense of providing medically accurate information about sex, sexuality, relationships, consent, and human development. Specifically in the revised code, there's things in there that say, in terms of what schools are required to teach regarding sex education, is that stressing that students should abstain from sexual activity until after marriage, teaching the potential physical, psychological, emotional, and social side effects of participating in sexual activity outside of marriage, teaching that conceiving children out of wedlock is likely to have harmful consequences, emphasize adoption as an option for unintended pregnancies. Of course, no mention of abortion, which was just passed as a constitutional amendment in Ohio in November. And we see the influence of this Ohio law in our health curriculum as it relates to the human growth and development, where the sex education conversation is housed. So my comments here tonight are not meant as a criticism of the team that put the health curriculum together. I think it's really in depth. I think it's awesome, and I'm by no means a sex ed curriculum expert, but I do have a lot of familiarity with creating and assessing student learning outcomes. And when I look at the health curriculum, particularly as it relates to the growth and development section where the sex ed is discussed, some of these learning outcomes, like at the middle school level, it says students will demonstrate the ability to use interpersonal communication skills to promote an age-appropriate choice related to being abstinent until marriage. Use decision-making skills in relationship to puberty, human sexuality. And what they actually get in there are content related to reproductive body parts, managing difficult relationships, individual rights to refuse sex. I know Kim mentioned that the curriculum is kind of in a skeleton form, but doesn't really have anything specific about asking for consent and receiving consent, demonstrating consent. It also includes responsibilities of parenthood, STIs, benefits of abstinence, and then sexual risk behaviors. At the high school level, there's a big emphasis on teaching students how to get information outside of the schools about sex education, which is great, but also it explicitly says in our health curriculum that we are to explain that most students are not sexually active, which I have some data that I'll talk about in a second that is actually false. As well as plan strategies for avoiding situations that place one at risk for engaging sexual behavior. So when I read these, these are not learning outcomes. I read them and they come off to me as scare tactics, shaming, some information literacy, sex avoidance, and misinformation brought about by abstinence-only education. And if we compare these sections of the health curriculum to the healthy eating portion of the curriculum, drug, alcohol, and tobacco education, we compare those to what's included as part of sex education. The sex education part is much less. The other ones are much more in depth, much more robust. So what's the big difference? Well, those other ones, healthy eating, drug, alcohol, tobacco, they're not driven by religion and politics, but rather best practices guided by the scientific community. We want our kids to be financially literate. We teach them drug and alcohol literacy and information literacy. So why not a medically accurate sexual literacy program that parents can choose whether they want their children to participate? I was talking to Kim earlier today. She said that we actually have very few opt-outs as it is related to the human development portion of our curriculum at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. The parents trust the teachers and the districts with this information, but much of the information they get is guided by Ohio law, is outdated and inaccurate. stigmatizes sex, only presenting it as a negative, presumes heterosexuality, stigmatizes the experience for children that were born out of wedlock, and leaves kids uninformed and have to search for information themselves. We lean into that piece about asking them or teaching them how to find information, who to talk to, but that information hasn't been vetted and students don't know what they don't know. They don't know the right questions to ask or how to ask them. We can provide resources, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, to help answer difficult questions, but we get to vet what those answers are instead of them stumbling across something they might find through a Google search. I strongly believe that we underestimate kids' capacity to learn and talk about uncomfortable topics and engage in course materials, and we overestimate at times parents' preparedness and ability and willingness to have these conversations. So there is a provision in that Ohio Revised Code that allows for additional sex education. And it reads, I'll paraphrase, but a school district can choose to offer additional instruction in venereal disease or sex education, not specified, blah, blah, blah. The school shall notify all parents or guardians of that instruction, including name of the curriculum, all this stuff, and then no district or school shall offer that instruction to a student unless that student's parent or guardian has submitted written permission for that student to receive that instruction. And this really excites me because I'm confident that one thing that all 5 of us can agree on is that we share a common ground on parents being able to have a choice in what their children learn in school, right? We ran, all of us had some sort of messaging around wanting parents to have a say in their kids' education. And we wouldn't be alone in this venture. According to the 22-23 Venereal Disease and Sexual Education Audit performed by the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, there are 58 school districts in Ohio that offer additional sex ed instruction beyond what is required with the abstinence-only training in the Ohio Revised Code. And in each case, parental notification was provided, and parents had the choice to opt into that part of the health curriculum. So I'm really hoping to find some common ground here and some agreement over the idea of providing some sort of optional sex ed education that we can provide guidance to Kim and Bob and the rest of the team to do some research on these things. And I'll get to my specific asks shortly, but I wanted to share some insights from the scientific community regarding sex ed in schools. I really thank everybody for their patience on this because I think this is some really important information. I have reviewed dozens of peer-reviewed articles on this topic and pulled 15 or so for the board to review. I'm going to cite a few of these, and so I created a shared folder that I sent out to you all before the meeting. I also have printed copies of the articles. If you all wanted more context on what these studies were about, I have them available for you. But I want to talk about a few different aspects of Ohio's sex education model and some of the benefits and drawbacks of it. Starting with abstinence-only education, which is what's required in Ohio. So there was a study in 2007 in the Public Library of Science Medicine Journal, and they noted, in, quote, 2 recent systematic reviews of abstinence-only curricula suggest that the best implemented and evaluated programs fail to delay the initiation of sexual intercourse or to produce other reductions in HIV risk behaviors. They also found no delays in sexual intercourse among virginity pledgers. And a U.S. congressional review found that 11 of the 13 most frequently used abstinence-only curricula contained false, misleading, or distorted information, including inaccurate information about contraceptive effectiveness. There was another study also in 2007 from the British Journal of Medicine who was looking at the effectiveness of abstinence-only programs in high-income countries, and they used the U.S. as the context for that. Finding, quote, evidence from this review suggests that abstinence-only programs that aim to prevent HIV infection are ineffective. And then there was another study that was, I feel really important to this conversation. 2017 study from the American Journal of Sexuality Education entitled "Worth the Wait: The Consequences of Abstinence-Only Sex Education for Marginalized Students." And these were interviews that were conducted with young women, youth of color, and LGBTQ or other gender nonconforming students. And there were 6 themes that emerged from the interviews with this population regarding abstinence-only education. One was a lack of practical information that met them where they were in their current stage in their lives. 2, abstinence-only education tends to normalize sexist and heterosexist stereotypes, which leads to othering of students of certain identities. Students of color were often adultified, where assumptions were made on their sexual activity, which resulted in education that also, wasn't relevant to them for where they were in their lives. There was a lack of emotional safety, where LGBTQ students did not feel safe asking questions or expressing themselves in these courses. And there was a reliance on fear and shaming, in addition to some of the information sharing for outside resources, as I had mentioned before. So this is just a sampling of studies among dozens in the scientific community that highlight the limitations of abstinence-only education, that talk about how it doesn't lead to delays in sexual intercourse. It doesn't lead to decreases in sexually transmitted diseases. It's not effective in preventing HIV, and it creates a place where marginalized students feel out of place within this form of education. On the other hand, there are multiple models of sexual literacy programs, medically based sexual literacy programs. One study specifically from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2022 examined 30 years of county-level data on teen births in counties that receive federal funding assistance to support these medically accurate sexual literacy programs that include more than just abstinence, include robust courses on gender identities, human sexuality, contraceptive use. And they found, quote, results of this quasi-experimental design provide evidence of the causal effect of federal funding for more sexually literate education on teen births. We find that federal funding reduced the overall rate of teen births at the county level by more than 3%. So that was over the course of 30 years. Teen birth rates in counties that supported sexual literacy had teen births decrease by 3%. Another study in the Archives of Sexual Behavior from 2021 found that laws that required more medically based sexual literacy programs decreased sexual activity and raised contraceptive use for youth who are sexually active, while state policies that mandate abstinence were found to increase sexual activity and decrease hormonal contraceptive use among youth who are sexually active. Evidence was found that in districts where the districts had local control over the content, such as what we're talking about here, like this supplemental content to what the state provides, there was a decreased probability that high school youth were having sex in the 3 months prior to when the survey was taken. Whereas requiring abstinence-only sex education led to an increase in the likelihood of sex in the prior 3 months to when the survey was taken. Let's see. I know this is a lot. There was a few other studies that I did want to mention. There was a study in 2021 in the Journal of Adolescent Health. It was a meta-analysis. It was a review of literature over 30 years on sex education in kindergarten through 12th grade. What they found was schools that adopted sexual literacy programs can also lower homophobia and homophobic-related bullying, can increase understanding of gender and gender norms, and it can improve knowledge and skills that support healthy relationships, right? And that there was evidence to suggest that sexuality education is most effective when it's begun early, before sexual activity actually begins. So what we're talking about here are outcomes of reducing the instances of adolescent sex, reducing outcomes that we're all interested in, such as STIs, teenage pregnancy, increasing things like contraceptive use, decreasing things like homophobia and homophobic bullying, and increasing tolerance. Voices that are often left out of this conversation are student perspectives and what students want to learn when it comes to sex education, all the time as adults making those decisions for kids. So there are another couple of studies I want to mention regarding these student perspectives. From 2020, the Journal of Adolescence. This was a review of literature, 16 studies in this topic between 2008 and 2019, which they found that adolescents viewed sexual health programs favorably if they utilized knowledgeable, open-minded educators and created a comfortable environment, provided content throughout early and late adolescence, and delivered relevant educational material. Where they destigmatize sexual health and improve the relevance of course content delivered. that relevance of course content is really important to this discussion. There's a 2022 article in the academic journal Sex Education that examined sex education preferences in a rural Indiana school district. Their data was collected through focus groups and web surveys. It's a mixed method study. And it's a district that teaches abstinence-only education. And this came straight from the students of those programs that said that the information was not relevant and they were being shamed into not having sex, that abstinence isn't relevant to them now or later in their lives because, quote, most people in the schools are already having sex, and so they're unable to connect the education that they're learning to their current lifestyles. There was a resistance to abstinence-only education. The students were not listening and not paying attention. And what they wanted was best practices for safe sex and information on what to do if you feel like you have contracted a STI. Information on abortion, even though in Indiana and the district it's controversial. There's religious objections to it, but recognizing it as needing the information to make a decision that's best for them. And regarding sexuality, it was noted that the LGBTQ students in the district were afraid of being pressured and being made fun of. There's one more study that I specifically want to mention regarding student perceptions on this. There was a very recent study, just came out in 2024 from the Journal of Adolescent Health, that examined a sample of nearly 1,400 middle and high school students in New York State and asked them what questions they had about sex and sex education to help try to guide the content that they would provide in these courses. And the topics included consent, pregnancy, withdrawal or pulling out, STIs, condoms, birth control, pain during intercourse, body and hygiene, alternative forms of sexual intercourse, and then some other individually coded ones that didn't nest into a higher theme. I mentioned earlier that in our district's health curriculum, it says that we're supposed to emphasize that most students aren't sexually active. And I said that that's not true. I referenced several studies already that talked about it. But there's other research that I provided in here. There's so much research out there that talks about the ages where students become sexually active. I presented some, as I mentioned, but I was able to find a study that really speaks to this. It's a nationwide sample of nearly 6,000 men and women ranging from ages 14 to 94 to examine rates of sexual behavior. So obviously we're interested in the adolescents in the study. So among the adolescent men in the study, 67% were sexually active by the age of 15, and we're talking about a very broad definition of what sexually active means. 9.9% by the age of 15 had engaged in what we would consider traditional intercourse with someone of the opposite sex. That number went up to 30.3% by 17 and 62.5% by 19. So 62.5% of adolescent males by 19 years old had what we would consider traditional intercourse in a nationwide sample. Among adolescent women, 43.3% were sexually active by 15, again with this broad definition. 12.4% had engaged in traditional intercourse with someone of the opposite sex by the age of 15. That goes up to 31.6% by 17 and 64% by 19. This data even skews even lower. I can show you some research on that when we're talking about adolescents from low-income families. So now, I'll get to my big ask. It wasn't quite 45 minutes. We can't continue to teach abstinence-only education. I think regardless of our personal values and opinion, the data is overwhelming, and many kids are sexually active. Again, broadly speaking, sexually active when they're like natal age and freshmen in high school age. And we are doing our kids a disservice. I'm being very sincere here. I'm not trying to be political or push any kind of agenda. I'm trying to follow data and science for the benefit of our kids, while respecting parents' rights to choose what is best for their families. I did speak with Bob Buck and Kim Tinsley, and they expressed that they need guidance from us on how to proceed. And I want to remind the board that we're not responsible for getting into the weeds of the curriculum and what books they're reading or what videos they're showing in class. But what they need to know from us is if this is something that we'd like to pursue for our school district, and we would need a majority of people on board to kind of commission them with, hey, let's go out and research and find what some of these options are. So here is my ask plainly. Would the board support Bob and Kim and the rest of the health curriculum team researching some medically accurate sexual literacy programs being used both in Ohio and across the country that we could potentially offer our students as a form of what we'll call abstinence plus sex education, where abstinence is still emphasized as the only way to prevent teen pregnancy and STI contraction, but adding additional content related to human development, sexuality, gender identity, and some of these other topics that I mentioned, while again respecting parents' rights to choose to make sure we stay compliant with Ohio Revised Code. So thank you very much for all that. I know that was a ton of information, it's a mouthful, it's a controversial topic, but thank you for your time on that. I'd love to hear the board's perspectives.
I know way back when I was in junior high, there was abstinence, and then there was the side effects of not adhering to abstinence, which was STIs and pregnancies and things like that. That was taught to us. I don't really have an issue with that being taught. I mean, this is cause and effect type of thing. The rest of your data, I'd have to read it. I mean, it sounds like you sent us a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so all that stuff I cited is in the shared folder, and I have it printed if you prefer that. So you can go get more context and read up on yourself. There's tons of other studies too, and if you have other studies that say opposite, I'd love to read those as well.
I have never taken so many notes during a board meeting, so thank you for that. I would be interested in pursuing what other options are out there, and I know there are curricula that go to another extreme, and I don't think this district would be in support of something that was fully comprehensive. I get that, but I do feel like there is a middle ground somewhere, and I had called Kim about this too, concerned that when I looked at this and have also looked at some of the CD data, and I've seen anywhere from 40 to 60% of adolescents by 18-year-old being involved in sexual activity. And I think, are we preparing our kids for the world they live in right now? We are educators. Our job is not to shame. Our job is not to fearmonger. Our job is to teach and to provide accurate information, no matter what the topic or conversation is. And so I do feel like if there are opportunities to make sure that the information our kids are seeking is accurate and the sources they are finding are valid, I think that would be really important. I'm gravely concerned that with the limited amount we talk about and the fear mongering, we do make this irrelevant for kids, make it feel like it's not grounded in what they need, and then they're going to go to their peers and they're going to go to the internet. And that's a scary proposition to me if that's your next best source of information without really understanding what you're looking for. So I would support looking for what other options are that would maybe provide a little bit more in-depth knowledge with some of the things like, yes, abstinence is the only 100% guarantee. But, I was looking at some different information today just as I was reviewing the health curriculum over the weekend, and one of the things I found recently was because there are other forms of birth control available now, they've actually seen a decreased use in condom rates among adolescents, not understanding that that is going to be your second best option for preventing an STI. Right? So yes, you may be able to prevent pregnancy, but that doesn't mean you're keeping yourself safe in other ways. And it just feels like we're at a point where maybe our kids don't have the accurate information they need to be making less risky decisions. And with 2 teens sitting in the school district, this feels pretty real. So.
Yeah.
So just to share, in 7th grade, they talk about how STDs are transmitted. Signs of STDs. They talk about long-term and short-term consequences of STDs. They also talk about relationships, alcohol, and drug use, and sexual risks that are accompanied by drinking or doing drugs. That's in the curriculum here. They also talk about, the benefits of being sexually abstinent, which I think is a huge benefit, especially through high school. The more partners you have, the worse off you are in relationships down the road. So I don't see any problem with that continuing to be taught. It talks about engaging in sexually risky behavior. It talks about, it talks about effectiveness or lack of effectiveness of condoms, so reducing the risk of pregnancy and STDs. That's all being talked about in 7th and 8th grade. scrolling down to high school. So I do not believe that we need to go into any more depth at such a young age. I think this is a conversation that parents need to be having with their children, which is why we had talked in great length about giving parents tips and material on how to talk to their children about these things. Because you might be okay with your child having an abortion, but that is something that I have very strong feelings against, and I would not even be okay with that being discussed in the classroom. So I think that when you're talking about things that are incredibly polarizing, whether it be religiously speaking or politically speaking, those are conversations that I believe are best left to the parents and at home. So our job is to educate students and prepare them for jobs in the future and for college or trades or that kind of stuff. I do not believe it is our job to step in as a parent and cover sexual identity or sexual behavior or any of these other topics in great detail with children, because this is such a hot topic and an emotional topic. I think this is something that is best left for parents to discuss with their children, and we can give them resources on how to discuss things, but I do not think this is something that needs to be brought into the classroom.
But Katie, I appreciate what you're saying, and I hear you, and I feel the same way, and I guess I have two responses as a parent. One, I fully support what you're saying, and I think that's why an opt-in would be incredibly important. And I can tell you, too, as a parent, I would opt into this because for the number of times I've tried to talk to my kids that they don't really want to engage in a full conversation about this with their parents is more than one. And so you know what I mean? So why would we limit options in terms of the education we want to give to kids? And again, you would have the option. Was it opt-in? Was that the way?
Yeah, I mean,
with
in the revised code, any additional programming that we would offer is required to be opt-in.
Right, so it would still be very much parent choice, because you would have to opt in to any more than the Ohio Revised Code information. So you're asking to pursue what else is out there, just so we know what the other curricula look like, what the options would be?
Yeah, and I'm not saying tonight we're deciding on anything. I would envision, Kim, correct me, like you would be able to provide us with some examples of what some of these additional curriculum could look like, and then we could potentially vote on if there's something we wanted to adopt. And so my ask was, if there's not interest from the board, we don't want to waste their time in having them do this research. But if there was a majority of people who are like, I'd like to see what some of these other options are out there, not making a commitment that we're going to adopt any of them at this point, just do we want to see what some options are because there is some compelling data? That's what I want to know.
What about if you had something at the next Parent Academy for parents? Would that be beneficial?
I mean, I think all of it's beneficial. And I think that's something we can have a conversation about. Is like, well, what does it actually look like? Not everything has to happen in the classroom. There can be, I mentioned like this idea of like we could provide additional information rather than just directing them like, well, you can go talk to your doctor, you can talk to these people. Here's some actual information that you and your parents can consume in the form of articles, books, podcasts, videos that can help lead to those discussions in the home. Katie, you did mention there are in the curriculum, there are a lot of these things related to STIs and condoms and all this type of stuff. There are some specific things that I think are missing. And again, I'm not a sex education expert, so I don't know where age appropriately this fits in. But things that I notice being absent from our curriculum are human development, which includes specifically sexual orientation and gender identity, especially going back to that piece that shows that can help lower homophobia and homophobic related bullying. Increased body positivity, conversations around that, more information about healthy relationships, medically accurate sexual literacy. So, what is actually happening in your body? again, I don't think we want to go down to some far extreme. I know this isn't like a liberal community. We have concerned parents about a topic like this. But another topic I think is vitally important that we do not have in our curriculum is media literacy. And what I mean by media literacy within this context is as it relates to adult content online. It's very easy to find. It's very accessible. We talk about addiction as it relates to drugs and alcohol, tobacco. There's addiction problems in our country as it relates to adult content online that can serve to set realistic expectations for what sexual relationships look like, realistic expectations for what occurs during sex, and promotes violence against women, which this is definitely something we don't want to promote.
I actually agreed with you on something.
There we go, see?
Porn addiction is an issue. And
You said porn, I
does,
didn't.
That's what it
Yeah.
is. It could be an addiction.
Yeah.
It could be a problem in relationships going forward. And it does give you unrealistic ideas of relationships in the future. So
For sure.
I actually agree with you on that.
So that's a type of thing, like that media understanding. I'm not suggesting at all watching that stuff in class. What
Should hope not.
what I'm suggesting is teaching our kids what it is, the expectations it creates around you, the dangers of it, those unrealistic expectations that it creates in your mind that leads to unhealthy relationships. There's no component of our curriculum, to my knowledge right now, that covers that piece. I didn't make up that abstinence plus term, by the way. That's a very widely used term as in states where there is abstinence only in education. We're still emphasizing abstinence is the only 100% effective way, but there's these other pieces that we can add to it. What those are, that's up to the committee to potentially research for us. Then we can review it a little bit more closely to see if it would be something we would want to adopt.
Well, I don't wish to see the Teaching and Learning Committee look at anything else. I am fine with the abstinence curriculum as it is. Look, similar to what Katie said, I think a lot of this is the parents' role. So that's my opinion on it.
Would
And
you?
I would absolutely love to see more, because I hadn't even thought about the adult content literacy piece of it and where that plays into what kids are finding when they're looking for the information they're not getting.
Sarah and Katie, I'm just asking your opinions on these things. Would you agree that not all parents have the same knowledge level or comfort level or skill set to have a standardized type of conversation with students, with their kids rather? So like, for example, what the conversations you might have with your kids are going to be different with the conversations I might have with my kids. So not everybody is getting the same type of education on what I don't know everything there is to know about it either, and I'm assuming neither do you. Like, we want to make sure our kids are having safe relationships, healthy relationships, they're educated on this, and they're not going online to look in the choose your own adventure world of Google to find out what this is all about.
Well, hopefully those parents have controls on their kids' phone or devices not to be able to search that information. No, I stand firm on what I said.
So the second question I wanted to ask then, and again, I'm not trying to get in an argument about this stuff, was I know parent choice was important to you all when you ran. How does that jive with, I'm saying this would be, parents could opt into this. We're giving the parents the choice of what they would want their students to learn. And it seems like that's what you were saying when you guys ran, is that you were for parent choice in their education. But now you're saying you don't want parents to have it, like, I don't want it. So can you help me understand a little bit more?
Sure,
What you mean?
I think we should follow the law, and it is your choice as a parent to have that kind of discussion with your child. I think you've done a lot of research. It sounds like you're really passionate about this subject, and I don't see what's stopping you from having that conversation with your kids. And if you want to get together with your friends and talk about it, I mean, that's your prerogative. But no, I think we should keep what we have as an abstinence only, because that's, that's where I would stand.
Okay. All right, Bob. What do you think?
Oh, I said abstinence and like I learned in junior high, it was the pros and not the pros and cons, the causes and effects. Abstinence only, and then if you choose not to, these are the consequences of your actions. I'm not saying a child is a negative consequence. I'm just saying this.
So are you saying you would not support research into additional options that we could be presented with from the district?
I wouldn't go past what we've already, like, if what I just said is about as far as I'm willing to go right now.
Which is what we have right now.
Well, okay.
All right.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything for board discussion? No?